Jesus' words to the Jews seem like a definitive rebuke. They want clarification as to whether or not he is the Messiah. They just want to hear it from his mouth directly. Give us a yes or no answer. It's not unreasonable for them to ask. But Jesus points out that if they're not with it enough to see the answer already within his actions, within his words, within his teachings, within their own heart, then odds are whether or not he says yes or no to them directly, it's not going to matter. They're not going to accept it. So when Jesus suggests that it's because they don't even know the Father that they don't know him, is very hurtful, I imagine. And I would imagine it wasn't just for a rebuke for the Jews, but even be a challenge for his own disciples, his apostles, because they too probably harbored some questions, some doubts, some insecurity. And for them to hear that Jesus was saying, if you don't get me, you're not from the Father, they might have wondered whether or not if they had the right stuff. But as much as it seems to be a rebuke, I think it's also an invitation. An invitation for us as people of faith to accept that this life of faith is going to be a life of tension. Tension between our heads and our hearts. Our heads can't get us to understand God because God is beyond our comprehension. Our hearts can lead us in ways of faith, but are also prone to misdirection. So it takes a combination of our heads and our hearts, faith and logic and reason. And those two are never going to be totally reconciled, but they can live as siblings, wrestling with one another, challenging one another, and holding each other accountable. And in that process, we remain fluid, pliable, stretchy, and so much so that it allows us to encompass things that are beyond one polarity or the other. When we reside in just our head or reside in just our hearts, then we end up with problems. And so Jesus is, I believe, challenging the Jews, not simply sending them away as not of his cloth, but suggesting that you go home and think about it. Do you really know God? And the answer is no, you don't. And that's okay. It leaves room for growth. It leaves room for mystery. And it also challenges them to say, what do your hearts tell you? And so we, in our world, live with lots of tension, but our tendency in our society is to look for polarization. It's easier for us to think of things in terms of black and whites. I'm a Republican as opposed to those Democrats, or I am conservative as opposed to those liberals, or I am whatever this as opposed to someone else. It's only easy to be polarized when you don't want to look and see the truth, the larger world. When in reality, it's a much broader world out there. And the more we're able to accept that, the more flexible we become, the less we get stuck in our ruts, and the more we're able to traverse this wonderful journey that leads us closer to unity in God.